Welcome to the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast, where we discuss topics related to sterile and non-sterile compounding pharmacy in an effort to promote compliance and increase quality. Please welcome your hosts, Bryan Prince and Seth DePasquale.
Hello, compounding pharmacy colleagues and friends, and welcome to another episode of the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast. Last week, we spoke with Shawn Valandra from Psc Environmental, and we were talking about aspects of building a USP 800 compliant cleanroom from both a sterile and non-sterile perspective, and what thinking and construction details goes into getting that done. We ran a little long and didn't want you to miss any of this conversation because there's a lot of great information here. So let's pick up our conversation where we left off.
One of the concepts that I believe in when it comes to designing a space is I like directly ducted to FFUs and directly ducted to exhaust blowers and low laminar. One of the concepts that I still see used a lot is the laminar flow walls, where it's a big open wall that goes up to your plenum. And the plenum creates its own circulation. Then you have your makeup air units cooling the air in the plenum, not going directly into the space. And again, I think for some people that's great. I think for semiconductor, it's awesome. I am not a fan of it for a lot of pharmacies because plenums take up a lot of space, and I don't think that it's the best way to be able to control the pressure in and out of a given space. And Bryan, you remember we've talked about this quite a few times, that as much as plenums make sense in some avenues, it really makes more sense to direct duct everything, right?
Yeah, my contention with that is always on the safety side, right? So you're looking at it on the engineering side. I look at it on the safety side because if the low air exhausts are pulling in particulates, so let's just say that technicians are breaching containment with dirty gloves. We know powder micronizes, browning then takes over. And then, of course, it's going to take the path of least resistance. And then those particulates, those APIs or whatever it is, the chemical that they're handling is then being pulled into the low air returns or low air exhaust. And then it's pulled up into an open plenum space. Well, then I would consider that plenum space contaminated. And so I would I would rarely recommend an open plenum system where there's going to be, and let's say it's a 797 lab, there's going to be pre-sterilization weighing. There's going to be, it's high risk. And so if they're doing like testosterone injectables and they're going from a dry powder in the pre-sterilization weighing, and again, they breach containment, they pull out dirty vessels to go get washed or whatever the case is, those micronized powders are going to get pulled in and then pushed up into an open plenum. And then, maybe the pre-filters, if the FFUs have pre-filters in the open plenum, maybe they filter them, maybe they don't. But regardless, in my mind, you've then created a contaminated plenum system. And I would never ask somebody to go up there and then work on one of the FFUs or any other component of the air handling system in a contaminated area without having them put on a full bunny suit and respirator system, which, as well as I do, is probably not going to happen.
Let's talk a little bit about Psc Selection. Now,
okay.
When I was getting a BSc, I honestly I didn't really know much about BSCs, and I tended to think at first that let's get the one that exhausts 100%. And luckily, I did have a couple people reel me back in on why that may or may not be the greatest idea for our particular application. What do you recommend? What's the what do you feel like is the way to go, and why would that be the way to go?
Well, I used to be a B2 person because I thought that 100% exhaust made the most sense. But after having talked to some manufacturers and going over this with Bryan quite a bit, the A2 makes a lot more sense. The issues are a B2 requires a blower per hood, and with even with that, the sensors that are on a B2, they're very finicky. The sweet spot in which they operate in can be thrown off very easily by filter loading, any type of condition you could think of that might change the airflow slightly. Well, it could cause the hood to go off on alarm, and then it's either too high or too low, and then it has to be reset by your hood certifier. They're the only ones that have the ability to reset those things as far as getting them back, adjusting the sweet spot. The A2s use a percentage less of air to exhaust out versus the B2s. An example would be a 4-foot B2 is about 700 CFM. An A2, it's only about 450 CFM. So you have less energy consumption just right off the bat. Now the A2s are they can be fitted with an air thimble, which will allow the air to be pulled out of the room even if the hood's turned off, which is a situation with the B2 where you can't do that. The hood has to stay on all the time. The A2 the hood can be shut off, so you could have some energy savings there. It also allows for A2s to be lined up and connected through a single house exhaust system, and without a pressure variation where the hoods will affect each other. So you can have a single blower and a single safety filter on an A2 secondary exhaust blower. That is something the B2 I have found that there's huge setbacks with that. So if I was going to choose one over the other, the A2 makes a lot more sense, and overall it costs less than per hood than the A2, and your exhaust CFM is reduced. So by reducing your exhaust CFM, that directly translates to smaller makeup air equipment and less money on the front end and less money for long-term energy consumption.
Just a quick point about A2 biological safety cabinets. Just a few moments ago, Shawn mentioned that they could be shut off, but in reality is they cannot. In a USP 800 hazardous drug room, they are contributing to the external exhaust of the room. They are connected to the external exhaust of the room. And so therefore, if you shut them down, then of course that would greatly affect the pressure, the room changes, and the whole balance of the equation. So we just want to clarify that in a sterile hazardous drug room, they are meant to run continuously, and you do not want to shut those off. Let's talk just a minute about the hood selection for the non-sterile rooms. There's questions about, what is a redundant HEPA hood versus can I use my existing hood? And we've established that if your hood is not redundant, that means it has two filters in line of equal value. They both filter 99.97%. That, again, the pre-filters and a primary filter does not qualify as a redundant. So let's kind of get that off the table. If a pre-filter does not have the same capture value. And so, Shawn, when you and I know we've gone into design factors, we've oftentimes recommended that the pharmacies purchase redundant HEPA hoods. And there's a reasoning behind that. And I want you to explain why we recommend redundant HEPA hoods over connecting via thimble their existing hoods that are probably single HEPA.
This is an easy one. A redundant hood, HEPA filtered hood can exhaust back into the space. So you can have as many hoods as you could fit within that given space. That makes the most sense, and it doesn't affect your air changes per hour. Now that means we're going to use the exhaust coming out of the room. We're going to have it in a laminar low exhaust panel in the wall, and we can make our air changes based on the room size and what's in the room versus a ducted solution, which would require us to use the exhaust CFM of the hoods themselves. So your example would be that if the room is 20 by 10 and you were to put 4 hoods in there at 250 CFM each, you'd be talking about 1,000 CFM. Well, what if your air changes for that room in an unducted, more ambient pulling through the wall situation is going to end up being 600 to 800 CFM, or maybe even more like 500 to 600. You're talking about half the amount of air from a makeup air unit, a single pass makeup air. Now, that means that you're less energy consumption long term, and you're going to be looking at a much less expensive makeup air unit. You might spend more on the dual HEPAs and the redundant HEPAs, USP 800 compliant units. But other than that, though, the amount of savings long term and on your capital equipment for your makeup air is going to be enough that there really should be kind of a no-brainer on how to do that.
So what we tell pharmacies that if they go ahead and yes, they invest that $8,000 to $12,000 in a redundant HEPA hood that is USP 800 compliant that can recirculate back into the space. That hood is then considered what we call room neutral. When it pulls into the face, it exhausts back into the room. It's not connected to a system. And so as your business grows, and when I say as it grows, here's the growth opportunity. There's going to be pharmacies out there that say, you know what, I'm not prepared to spend $70,000, $100,000, $150,000 to play this USP 800 game. I'm out of it. Well, those patients are going to go somewhere, and those patients most likely may show up in your pharmacy. So there's a business opportunity moving forward if you know that your competitors just are not in the business of moving forward with the capital investment. So another 20 patients walk through your door, another 30 patients, whatever that is, another 10 scripts. You need another workstation, you need another technician. But as you add more workstations and a redundant HEPA hood, you can continue to incrementally grow the number of workstations that you need and not have to worry about the overall balance of the space. So what we're saying here is that if you connect your hoods in a non-sterile 800 room, if you connect via thimble to an external exhaust system, every time you want to add another workstation, it will throw off the balance of the room because you've added another workstation that you need to connect.
Interesting. So you're almost talking yourself out of a job, though. But and meaning like it's less work on the front end in terms of setting up exhaust systems and HVAC and getting all that stuff straight. But it's way more cost effective if you just have a double redundant HEPA filter system.
Well,
you can put.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes and no. I mean, no matter what, you still need a single pass makeup air unit, and you need to have low laminar ductwork through the walls or inside of the walls. There's still parts of this that, ironically, you'd think, oh well, you're not going to be ducting everything out. No, we're not. But there's still just about as much work to do. It's just that the outcome for the engineering control equipment ends up being, it might be a smaller scale, but it's still just as much work to get that done as it would be if it was all ducted together.
Interesting. Okay.
So last week, Shawn, you were speaking at a conference specific to USP 800. It was down in Miami. I'm just kind of curious, since now we're in a time frame where where the implementation date has been delayed another 17 months. So now we're at December 1st of 2019. That's when the delay is. But yet these folks had probably already signed up for this conference prior to knowing what was actually going to happen. Tell us, what was the general attitude of the attendees there? Are they in park mode and that they're going to wait, or were they just keeping the ball moving down the field? Tell us about the attitude of the attendees.
Well, the attitude of the people that were there that didn't get out of it for whatever reason, it was still very positive that they were going to treat this as if the 2018 date is actually there. They wanted to know, they wanted to start talking about how to get their facility compliant and what it's going to take. I do believe that everybody started to get the understanding, pharmacists out there, compounding pharmacies, that if this isn't something that's going to happen in 3 months. It takes time. It takes 6 to 9 months, even if you have an existing facility, to start, budget, order, implement, and test, and that in that order. And there are probably still going to be people that are going to think that they can get this done in the last 6 months before that extended date. But everybody that was at this learning session, they all wanted to know, and they were acting as if nothing had changed.
And I would echo that. That was the general census. I also spoke at a conference in Tulsa, Oklahoma last week, and so I was trying to get a pulse of where folks were at, because they had signed up prior to knowing what that the implementation date was going to be pushed back. And so I still wanted to get the pulse of where people were at, and they're absolutely on board because they understand that there is a timeline. It takes, there's a lot of moving parts to make this thing happen. And so, as I had mentioned in a previous podcast, is that yes, you want to go ahead and at least start the planning, the budgeting process now, because what entrepreneur would not like to be able to see into the capital expenditure budget of 2019 to know what that's going to look like, and then start the financial planning now.
So I think one of the main themes that, I guess, even with me writing what I wrote, and Shawn is very relevant to this point, is that from a pharmacist perspective, we don't know a lot of this stuff. We don't know it really well. And it's all sort of foreign material to us. And the biggest lesson I pulled from all this is that you really need to find the right people to accomplish these things. And at least if you want to get it done right the first time.
Well, you know what's funny about that too, Seth, is that it is not necessarily going to be the person that costs the most or has the most notoriety in the pharmacy circles. I mean, you look at me. I can't say that I've done 10 pharmacies so far, but the ones I have done have been done where that I've helped build were designed in such a way that it made the most sense for that particular customer, which is what Bryan and I look at handling, is everybody on their own. We do have a bit of a template that we have a questionnaire, so we talk to people a certain way that we ask questions, but everybody's handled per their situation, and we're not trying to force anything on anybody, which is what I've in air filtration and in the pharmacy market that I've noticed, is that there are a lot of manufacturers out there that want to force feed you what they have to offer, and that is where the difference lies between Bryan and I and other people out there.
Great point. It's a great point. I mean, I really appreciate being able to talk to somebody that, both you and Bryan, that understand and truly get this, and can bring it down to a level that I can understand it and get it and explain it fairly well. I think there's definitely a need for more people like that within the industry that, one, truly know what they're talking about, and two, can actually relay that to everyone else. So thank you.
So Shawn, man, it's always awesome to get to talk to you and hear how your thought processes are for USP 800 and 797 and that whole engineering side, because it still blows me away to hear all of this stuff. So I appreciate you taking time and joining us on this podcast. And maybe in future episodes, we'll have you back again, because you're a wealth of knowledge that I think everybody in the compounding pharmacy industry could certainly learn something from. So thanks again for joining us.
Well, I appreciate the invite, and I do hope to come back again. I enjoy helping people. That's the bottom line. And the pharmacists I've helped so far, they've been a pleasure to work with. So I look forward to helping out more people.
Well, that wraps up a 2-week conversation with my good friend Shawn Valandra on facility design and clean room design and air handling and engineering. And so we hope we've, to a certain degree, demystified this process. It's like Seth had said earlier at the very beginning, is that it was a longer conversation than we had anticipated. We always want to try to keep these podcasts to around 25 minutes because we want to honor your time. But there were a lot of good nuggets of information that we wanted to share with you, our audience. So that's why we made it a 2-week segment. On our next episode, we welcome Shari Kramer. She is the owner of Pharmacy Specialties in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She's been a PCAB accredited pharmacy since 2011, and she has earned the distinction in hazardous drug handling, which is a new program from PCAB. And she's going to walk us through her own situation, her own experience with being an early adopter to USP 800 compliance. So it's going to be an exciting week, so I ask that you join us. And in the meantime, as always, keep raising the bar.